Hey guys, welcome to yet another episode on RevAtlas. I'm Sandeep, and in today's video we're going to be checking out the OnePlus 7T Pro that has just been announced. So we'll be doing a review of the smartphone to let you know whether or not it's worth buying or worth upgrading to. And no, this isn't the 7T Pro, this is in fact the 7 Pro. And wait a second, this here is the 7T Pro. Kind of hard to distinguish, isn't it? But we'll be talking about the differences and all the other aspects in detail in this video, so stay tuned for that. But before we get started, please do give us a thumbs up at the end of the video if you happen to enjoy the video, and also do subscribe for more content like this. Now let's get the review started. Now let's start by talking about the design itself. Now, as you saw in the intro, there's hardly any difference between both the phones when you look at it from the front. You can't really tell them apart. Of course, the wallpaper is slightly different on the 7T Pro, but if you put them side by side, they're practically identical. There's no change that you can, make out from the front itself, but there are a few changes from the back panel when you flip them over. So a person who's a technophile or someone who's really interested in technology and follows all the tech developments might be able to tell them apart, but for the untrained eye, they still look very, very similar. But I'll give you two differences which kind of set them apart. The first is that the laser autofocus module that's there on the camera island on the OnePlus 7 Pro has been shifted outside it. It's actually to the left side of the camera module on the 7T Pro, and that is the first major change. And the other change being the difference in the blue color itself. So on the 7 Pro, you had a slightly darker blue color and a darker black at the top, while you have a lighter sort of black or gray at the top and an even lighter blue at the bottom. So this is very similar to the OnePlus 7T if you have seen it, but the 7T didn't have such a drastic gradient at the back, which this does. There's also a very slight difference in terms of the overall texture, where the 7T Pro feels a bit smoother, a bit more satin-like compared to the 7 Pro. But what has not changed is in terms of the overall dimensions, ergonomics, the weight, everything remains the same. And that is both a good thing and a bad thing. For people who love big displays, it's great, but people who don't like large size smartphones, it's still not great, considering it's still big, it's still heavy. Now I'll put the 7 Pro aside and move on to the other aspects of the 7T Pro itself. So this blue color is quite different. It also gives a greenish color at certain times, and it looks really good, and I prefer this blue over the previous 7 Pro's blue. But in case you're looking for something more unique, there is also a McLaren edition of the OnePlus 7T Pro. So we saw the McLaren edition first with the OnePlus 6T, and now it's coming to the 7T Pro as well. And as you can see, it is in a color that's called papaya orange, which is what McLaren uses as the official color. And it's not entirely orange. Basically, you have the highlights over here which are in orange. You also have subtle orange highlights around the camera, and you also have an interesting sort of pattern underneath the glass, which kind of shows itself when you turn it around or play around with the light itself. So this is available only in the McLaren edition, and it also has a few other differences which we shall talk about later on in the review. Now moving over to the display itself, it's the same 6.67 inch Fluid AMOLED display, 1440p resolution, 19.5:9 aspect ratio, no notch, courtesy of the pop-up camera. So display is still brilliant, 90 Hz refresh rate, and I would say if you're someone who watches a lot of content, a lot of YouTube, Prime, Netflix, etc., or does a lot of gaming, then this smartphone is definitely going to keep you happy. It'll work great indoors and outdoors, and overall is a fantastic experience. And even the curve is not too much that you get annoyed by it. I know a lot of people don't like curved screens, but the curve in this is ever so subtle that you're not going to get annoyed, or you're not going to hate getting a curved display smartphone. Now, speaking of the pop-up camera, it's a 16 megapixel f2 camera, 1x3.1 inch sensor size and 1 micron pixel size. It can be used for face unlock as well, and I find it faster than the 7 Pro. The difference is ever so slight and ever so marginal that, unless you put them side by side, you don't notice the difference, but it actually is a bit faster, and I find that helps in terms of face unlock as well, considering that you might use the face unlock more than the selfie camera itself with the front-facing camera. So since it's an AMOLED panel, you still get the fingerprint scanner here under display. It's also slightly faster, and both these actually work in 360 degrees, which is another advantage, considering that some of them don't really work in 360 degrees. It can be annoying when you're laying in bed and you want to unlock the phone, for example. But this works in 360 degrees, both the fingerprint scanner and the camera, and both are marginally faster than the 7 Pro itself. Now coming to the speaker setup, this speaker setup is also stereo just like the 7 Pro, but the 70 Pro is a bit louder. In fact, in our testing we found that it's 1 decibel louder, and I felt that there was a bit more bass, it sounded a bit more fuller compared to a 7 Pro, which could be a result of tweaking rather than having different hardware itself. Now, unless you compare them side by side, you're not going to know the difference as such, and both are extremely good in terms of the output. But still there is a difference and you will notice it too. I quite like that they still have the alert slider. Now that I've shifted to the iPhone Pro Max, I kind of love it on that. Having a mute switch is great, but I think this takes that a step ahead by having, you know, a regular ring mode, vibrate mode, and a completely silent mode, which I love, and it gives great feedback as well. Speaking of which, the haptic feedback in this is still really good and I quite enjoy it. Now, coming to the cameras itself, the setup remains the same. You get a triple camera setup. It has the primary Sony IMX586 48 megapixel half-inch sensor, which has 0.8 micron pixel size but captures by default 12 megapixel pixel bin photos with 1.6 micron pixel size, and there's optical image stabilization as well. You get a telephoto camera. It's an 8 megapixel camera with 3x the zoom level, but it's actually not exactly 3x, it's 2.87x in terms of the zoom, but they advertise it as 3x and market it as such. And you also get an ultra wide angle camera, 16 megapixel f2 camera with 117-degree field of view. The telephoto camera is also optically stabilized, but the ultra wide angle camera is not. But the ultra wide angle camera has larger f2 aperture compared to f2.4 aperture of the telephoto lens. And overall, the camera setup and the image quality remains very similar to that of the 7 Pro and the 70, etc. And to be honest, the video is really good, but I feel that the photos could have been a bit better. The processing is what really lets it down, and I still think that OnePlus needs to do some sort of tweaking or processing to make it better than it actually is, because the hardware is not too bad. They can actually achieve better results if they put some thought and effort behind it. And that has been the case for quite a while now, and I hope that at least with the next generation we do see some huge upgrades in terms of the overall image quality. Now, in terms of battery life, this has a 4085 mAh battery, which is 85 mAh more than the OnePlus 7 Pro. Practically speaking, it's not all that different, and you don't really see any huge benefit, if none at all. And you get around 5.5 hours of screen on time on the 90Hz mode with 1440p turned on. So OnePlus 70 with a 3800 mAh battery gives you 5.5 hours of screen on time at best if you go for 90Hz on 1080p display, but this with a larger display, higher resolution at 90Hz gives you roughly the same. Now, if you want to extend the battery, you can do two things. Either you can turn it down to 60Hz, but why would you, considering the display is so good and 90Hz is really what people want the OnePlus devices for mainly, at least in this generation. So you would ideally be sticking to 90Hz, but 60Hz will give you around 1 hour of screen on time more. Or what you can do is actually change it to adaptive resolution, where it comes down to 1080p when you don't need it. That gives you around half an hour screen on time more. Or if you want, you can even set it to 1080p all the time, which gives you additional half an hour. So by reducing the resolution all the way to 1080p, you get 1 hour extra screen on time, which brings it to 6.5 hours. And if you put 60Hz on top of that, you can get it all the way up to 7.5 hours of screen on time, which is pretty good. But 5.5 hours is on the smaller side. Regardless of when your battery drains out, you have really fast charging in the form of the Warp Charge 30T that came with the OnePlus 7T. So there's no difference in terms of the actual wattage, but there's a difference in terms of delivery. So someone had done a test where they compared the Note 10 Plus with 25 watt charger that comes in the box and put it against the 7 Pro, which comes with the 30 watt charger, and they found that the 7 Pro, despite having a smaller battery and larger wattage, it actually took an hour to charge, while the Note 10 Plus with the larger battery and smaller wattage took less than an hour to charge. So what they've done now is they have actually tweaked the same, and we showed you that the 70 charges from 15% to 100% in just 45 minutes. On this, on the other hand, charges to 100% in just about 50 minutes. So 5 minutes is all it takes to charge that extra battery, and considering that this is larger than even the 7 Pro, which took around 1 hour to charge, it's really impressive. And if you're looking at the refill rate, it's around 84 mAh per minute compared to 66 mAh per minute that was there on the 7 Pro itself. The other change is in terms of the internal. So you get a Snapdragon 855 Plus chipset with this, which technically should be faster than the OnePlus 7 Pro, and it is. But in terms of the practical benefits that you get from it, it's very hard to distinguish between the 7 Pro and the 7T Pro, because the 7 Pro, it was already amazingly fast to begin with, and the difference is so negligible that, you know, unless you kind of use it for benchmarking or those kind of things, you can't really tell the difference, and the 7 Pro would serve you just as well. You get an 8 plus 256 GB variant with the regular OnePlus 7T Pro. It's UFS 3.0 2-lane, and you also get dual nano SIM. But in case you want more RAM, you have to go for the McLaren edition, which comes with 12 GB of RAM by default and 256 GB of storage as well. There's no news about a 6 GB RAM model nor a 128 GB storage model, and we're also not sure whether, you know, the regular OnePlus 7T Pro will eventually get a 12 GB RAM model. But currently, if you want 12 GB, you have to go for the McLaren edition, and the regular comes with A plus 256 by default itself. Also, just like the OnePlus 7T, the 7T Pro comes with Android 10 out of the box with Oxygen UI on top of it, and performance has been great. There's no issues so far with it, and we love the fluidity and the update cycle that OnePlus has. So overall, a very solid software experience. So to sum up, the OnePlus 7T Pro is a great flagship smartphone. I'd mentioned that the OnePlus 7 Pro was also a great flagship smartphone, and the 7T Pro is in fact better. But that does not mean that anyone who has a 7 Pro should upgrade to the 7T Pro, because what you're getting in return for the extra money that you pay, or, you know, the loss in your sale of the 7 Pro and then the additional amount of money that you have to put in for the 7T Pro, is very, very little and very negligible. So I would suggest anyone with the 7 Pro should stick to the 7 Pro and wait for maybe the 8 Pro or even the 8T Pro. But for those of you who may want a significant upgrade or a high-end smartphone, the 7T Pro is a great smartphone. And even for those who kind of didn't go for the OnePlus 7 Pro and went for the OnePlus 7 and regret it, you can still upgrade to a 7T Pro and still have a great smartphone. But if the reason that you didn't upgrade to the 7 Pro or get the 7 Pro in the first place was the fact that it's a huge smartphone and you want something smaller, then in that case I would suggest going for the OnePlus 7T, because you essentially get 95% if not more of what the 7T Pro offers, but in a smaller and more affordable form factor. So I personally like the 7T the best, then followed by the 7T Pro and then the OnePlus 7. But for those of you who want a large screen smartphone, the 7T Pro is definitely the better choice. That's it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching. See you again in the next one.